Boil water advisory, yeah, boil water advisory, boil water advisory, boil water advisory. Well, our brothers and our sisters, they've got the dirty, dirty water. They got no clean water to live. Oh no, they boil their water to cook in. They boil their water to bathe in. They can't even brush their teeth. Oh no, they run to boil water.
I'm in the studio here with Sammy Chippewa, and he's a friend of mine on Facebook, and he also knows a lot about the water on the res. So, Sammy, you're here today. We're going to talk about some water. What do you know about the res water?
As a child, we never really considered the water and what it was doing to us or why. As I got older, I worked for farmers on the outside of the reserve. And working for farmers, of course, water becomes a major issue and source, and you find ways to aggregate it, get it to your farm, and get it moving so that you can make your product and make money. Now, in terms of that, how does that all relate? It relates in terms of from a professional career, I moved on from there to other things like development of land. And I'm mainly a business standpoint, and the reasons I'm looking at water and development around First Nations reserves and what it would mean to us on First Nations reserves to have a properly regulated system in and around water, what it would mean to the country in general, Canada, and regulated safe, healthy water that we can be sure that that source that's regulating us is has all our safety, health, and concerns in mind, so that what it really comes down to is we all want safe water. We all want to be able to drink safely. We all I was just sitting with a doctor this afternoon, and when I got the invite to be on the show, I had asked him, I was like, okay, I just got invited to go and sit and talk down here. Now, from your point of view, why would this be attractive at all? And we start walking and talking about why that would be important, or why it's important to all of us. What matters to all of us in it? And while we were talking, a few points came up that just made sense. And it's not just over a term of one conversation, but it's a term of over a lot of conversations with a lot of Canadians, a lot of people that can understand these points and why they're so hard-hitting for us, why they mean so much to us, why they mean so much to our children. It's the water. It's all our base. It's all we really have. It's our only fuel. It doesn't matter about fossil fuels, electric fuel. None of it's going to matter if we don't look after the water properly. And what we're seeing based on even today, look at the flooding we just had, the flooding that we just had from city streets. And if you've worked on a city platform, if you've worked in city streets, or if you've done development in any town like, say, the City of London, you're going to understand a certain amount of flow and how that flow is regulated and why. Right. Now, when a flood happens, you can't really regulate anything. You can't. When nature takes its course, there is no regulation. She just opens the door and sends everything through, and that's going to be our issue with a lot of things like that. And if we don't look after these things properly, those type of things will. They will cause more problems in our own water and in things we do and how we drink that. Now, a lot of people can say, well, we can just throw money at it and we can buy our own filter systems and we can buy all these things. Well, when you're talking in terms of water, you're talking about a fluid substance that moves around our planet freely. that creates a current that all feeds itself, that all feeds each other. So when you're talking about water, you really can't do that. We really can't say, oh, we'll close the bank over here and we'll open another one over here, and we'll shut down that Walmart and open up this one. When you're talking about water, it's all the same.
Yeah, for example, I believe there was a picture on Facebook that you would have seen as well, where the back of Labatt's was completely overflowed with the Thames River. Those banks went over the dam that's back there and over the sides and was up in their backyard. We don't know what was in those barrels and things that were stored in the backyard of Labatt's.
This is why water is going to be our major source of education, our major source of understanding each other, our major source of being able to tie it all together. It helps us tie it all together. It helps us tie each other to each other in a positive base that no one can say, well, this is mine or this is yours or I have this. As a First Nations, I'm saying, okay, if I have a First Nations community and I live in this part, now this part is my water. This part is the water I need to feed my community. Having that said, if you affect my water, if I affect your water, we're hurting each other, right? That's the basis of it. And we can't have that, so we find a way to regulate inside those terms in a real business sense, where it's you're talking about money and people and currents. Now, the thing about water is it works in a current, just like money does. You can follow those currents the same way. You have to be able to source them out. You have to be able to understand each other. That's probably one of the hardest issues we face as different cultures clashing here in Canada, is that we don't understand each other. We like to think we do. And we say, I have a Native friend over here. Or we say, I have a Caucasian friend over here. But we don't really understand each other. And those get to be hard points when you're dealing with negotiation in terms of any business or anyone trying to sell something that the public needs to be able to move ahead. So to be able to do that in a real way for a First Nation, to not hurt the outside world. Because we're seen as hurting the outside world if we act a certain way towards business. Say Petro, right? Look at Petro right now and how they show First Nations hurting a certain sect of society because of the way they are thinking and acting. Now, First Nations aren't saying you can't be a certain way. What they're saying is be a certain way responsibly. Because unless we're seeing today the back end of unreliable, unresponsible movement, right? And that hurts people. It's plain and simple. Just like discipline that's too harsh. Any of that kind of stuff causes backlash, bad reaction. It causes things that hurt people. That causes things that cause people to do other things that hurt. It's a plain, simple thing that we can all see and know. It's not something that you need a PhD for.
It's human.
It's human.
It's human.
So with that, this isn't my idea, the water school for decision makers. It's
Heather
Heather Gingerich, as far as I know, right? And
we got together earlier and said, we should do this, because I had the outlet for things that needed to be talked about, discussed, and, put in public opinion to say, hey, if you have questions, you can call us here at you can send in a text here at the station at 519-661-3600, and we'll do what we can to answer your questions. And I guess I don't know if you know about we all think, oh, well, you're on a boiled water advisory. Is this healthy?
We know it's not healthy. We know that you can kill a certain amount of bacteria, yes, with boiled water, but you can't filter it, right? So we don't know what else is getting in the water in terms of, okay, so if you've got a boiled water advisory, we don't know what else we're getting in that water. We really don't. We don't have a clue. We're trusting a system that we're told is there to protect us, there to help us. And frankly, as First Nations, we've seen this a lot of this stuff before. So it's for us, it's shaky ground to be able to say, okay, we're just going to trust you, and we believe that. Of course, we have people that go to school, and we have things that we can do in terms of those things to create our own safety net, say. But as well as that, there's only a certain amount regulated within that system, and we know there's more. We know there's far more. Speak to someone like Heather Gingerich, and you'll know how much more, right? There's they currently test for 79 contaminants, something like that. And
it's about 80%. If you take one single sample of water, you can turn around, take it to a lab, and you're only given about 80% of the information back. And that's due to governmental standards.
Right.
So we already know that I believe they test like 70 out of like the 93 periodic table elements. But that doesn't check for hormones or any other thing like that. Now, during the 80s, Heather and I have talked about this before because it's kind of a woman's thing, but we talked about the 80s and everyone was on birth control pills. And there would be times where people would turn around and flush them. Reasons we don't really care about, but the fact that they flush them means that there are hormones going into our water treatment facilities, and the treatment facilities aren't able to handle such a molecular level. Is that your understanding of the water labs as well?
Yes, that's my understanding. So they don't have the technology to be able to properly deal with what's going through. So even a boiled water advisory, yes, you're not going to get E. coli. Basically is what we're fighting against, right, with that type of thing. The other, 15 chemicals that we know of are coming through, like you said, hormones, radon. Like, now we all know these things exist normally, but what we also know is that we're getting more of them. We're getting more of them from hospitals. We're getting more of them from businesses. We're getting more of them from schools. We're getting more of them from everywhere. And we're not saying stop growing, stop producing, stop being human. What we're saying is do it more responsible. Yes, it takes a little bit more work. Absolutely it does. And this is the big part, is because most people today, we're in a hurry. We're in a hurry to do almost everything. And we can't help that. We're trying to get as much production done as we can in a day, plus enjoy the little bit of time with the people we love at the same time at the end of that day. Problem is when we push out those other things, that they tend to build up, and that's what we've seen with our water, and we've seen it many times. I could name 100 stories where I was working for a corporation or different people here and there, where I've witnessed things that I probably thought shouldn't have happened. And because I didn't speak up at the time, or if I did speak up, I would have lost my job. Because of those things, we tend not to. We tend to look the other way, and it's not. I'm not saying. We're not saying everyone's bad people. What we're saying is we're all pretty much guilty of this compliance on our water. What we need to do is find a way around it, to be able to help each other, so that our birth rates don't come up with cancer clusters. Our children aren't born with leukemia. Our daughters aren't born stillborns. And our boys aren't born with brain tumors. That's what we're asking for, is that little bit of hard work at the start that stops all that. And it's possible. It's possible to do it today, but we have to be able to care about each other on a real level, to say, okay, I care what happens to you. So if I care what happens to you, it's going to come back to me, because you're drinking the same water I'm drinking.
Yeah. Even although even the res is on a different system, it's still government related. They are. I know that the three nations just outside of London here, Chippewa, Oneida, and Muncie, Delaware, I know that they are on they've signed a contractual agreement of some sort with an outside company that is so-called regulating the water. And we have an elder that will hopefully be joining us next segment, that her name's Wilma, and she's worried about her water because it smells. Well, apparently they've put in a pipeline of some sort that, of course, chlorine has been put into. As we know, chlorine kills bacteria again, but when you're not used to a change in the smell of water, it comes down to your basic senses to know that this is something that can harm you. And it's the dosage, I guess, in a sense. And that dosage can become lethal, let alone cancer causing, or genetic mutations, or you name it. Pretty much anything can happen with anybody's body. It's not a Native American issue. It's not a Caucasian issue. It's a human issue. So we need to get the water cleaned up. So I know Heather, unfortunately, isn't able to join us, but hang on there. Heather will be out there to gather you soon. What can we do? What can we do?
There's a lot of things we can do. First of all, we need to educate each other on what we're really seeing in the water. And everybody's really got to be able to come clean, kind of, because you can't, you can look at this in a one-sided view and say, oh, this is another way to make industry look bad, or to make, but we all benefit from industry. We all benefit from growth. We do it on a basis of convenience mostly, which I'm not saying that we have to go backwards, but we have to go forward with a little more steps in place. I learned this simply by being in business, honestly. That's how I came about it. And I learned it because the friends I had in business looked after me to a certain extent, made sure I always had everything I needed, did their best to help me during those times. When that happens, your view gets healthier, your food gets healthier, your water gets healthier. When that happens, your mind is allowed to grow better, stronger. You come up with better solutions than you previously had, simply because your food intake, your water intake is a better source. When it's a better source, you get better. You slowly, gradually, your mind feeds itself, and you slowly, gradually go there. You can't help it. It's a walk that gets you there. Now, it's my same point with this water, is that, yes, it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's not easy. It does not happen overnight. But you can do these types of things if you put down your guard and you say, okay, maybe there's a solution inside of here that can help us all. And if it can help us all, and it helps certain communities to develop and get bigger because they've been held back in a certain level, then if that getting bigger and growing means a little bit of work for them, then they have to do the work or they won't get there. They have to do the work or they won't get there. So if they got the ability and the work's there and they can do the work, then why not do the work? That's our basic point, and the fact that if we're going to live together, if we're going to talk like we live together, and we see all these public things happen every day. I've been out there on the street a lot. I've seen a lot of people. I know what's out there. And my point is, and only because of my friends who have helped me so much through all this process, to say, I care about what you care about. So if you want help, I'll help you. And it's that simple. It's that simple, and it works in terms of our water and how we decide where we're going to go from here. And if we do these things together, we have to do them that way. They have to be from a standpoint where we're respecting each other for a certain reason, because that disrespect, it comes out in your projects and the things you do and how they come across. Look at the water today.
Yes, you're so right. And I mean, Heather brought up a good point too, that even there was somebody who had dug into the stream and removed some of the rock bed. And I mean, doing something a little as simple as removing the rock bed can turn around and have really adverse effects on the water, because that rock bed, as the water tumbles over, like this is going back to basic, as the water tumbles over and goes over, like current wise, it oxygenizes the water. So it puts more oxygen and essentially cleans the water, as Mother Earth, as we've been taught, Grandmother Moon, every 28 days recycles the water, and we're purifying. So we need to keep those natural cycles in rhythm. And once you reduce those, though, like the basis of the water tumbling over the rocks, you lose that purification process. And that's part of healthy water. That's part of healthy drinking water. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, yes, you are. And it's part of the basic plan, I guess, as far as when I speak to Miss Gingerich and her ideals on how to move things ahead. It has a lot to do with nature and how you move those things in terms of nature. The things you can put in place to make sure that the water stays healthy, and how you do that. Now, I see it the same way as the First Nations being on a water source, and how that can help be beneficial to us all in terms of regulation, in terms of how it makes a healthy community, because you're now investing in a healthy community. It's all symbiotics. It all works hand in hand and together. And unless it works together, just like the financial world, unless it works in tandem so that you can build one, so the other one builds the other one, it won't work. It will come crashing down on itself. And it's a lot of what we're seeing today in terms of our water, and why we have people like Heather Gingerich, who stood up and had to stand up on a basic principle of her children. And that's probably the best stance you can come from.
Thanks, Sammy, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Go home, back to the roots that make me strong. I want to be with my people. Hey, hey, oh, many say I don't belong. Well, I'm married out of love. How can that be so very wrong? Well, now, they'll see 31, honey. Now that's a real treat. If you want to cause dissension, it can be beat. Yeah, divide and conquer, that's the name of the game. Well, I can't go home, it's a crying shame. Ooh, yeah, I got the blues. Oh, whoa, whoa, I got them. Bill C-31. My motion fought in the war to keep this land true, strong and free. So they took away status and said it was equality. Well, now he doesn't have a home, but you can't say that man's not Cree, 'cause how can that be? Well, the C-31, my friends, it doesn't bode well. For future generations, it could be the road to hell. 'Cause status, he gets status, yeah, that very law. In 80 years, he won't exist, and that is the law. Ooh, the C-31, yeah, I got the blues. I got them, Bill C-31. Hey, hey, Bill C-31, yeah, I got the blues. She's got the blues. I got them, Bill C-31. Yeah, yeah, yeah. got them. Bill C-31 Blues.
And that song was Asani's Bill C-31 Blues here on Smoke Signals Radio, Western All Indigenous Music with Kim A. And joining me now is Heather. Sammy's stepped out for just a moment. He'll be back. But Heather, you feeling all right?
Yeah, we're like the pokeroo, right?
All right.
You never see us together because we're the same person.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
pretty much. Works for me. So, you said we have. What about regulation?
I love talking about regulation, and it's something that scares a lot of people, and it really shouldn't, because that is the public part of the public sector. So it is the one point in the system where we should have absolute clarity and certainty, and we should have no secrets. So whatever the public needs to know, what the government knows, and they need to have access to that information. So, Sam and I actually are two different people. It's true. We have very different perspectives, and this leads to a lot of animated conversations. But we really, it's been a process of learning to understand each other. And 'cause at the end of the day, we both want the same thing. We just have very different ways of viewing that and getting there. And that is really the nexus of the Two-Row Treaty, the spirit of the Two-Row Treaty from 1613, and then the British signed on in 1667, which then engaged the Crown into a relationship with Indigenous peoples, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy specifically. So, we are treaty people. That is still in force. And one of the teachings, it's like with most Indigenous teachings, it's very layered. There's many aspects to it. And I was taught once at actually the Six Nations powwow by Kelly Gurley, that the treaty is not 400 years old. It was several thousand years old. And while the Dutch in 1613 were viewing it more as a trade treaty, a trade agreement, it had nothing to do with governance. It had everything to do with trade. So that was one incarnation. But prior to that, it was thousands of years old. And it was a teaching about men and women, and how men and women with, women primarily engaged in water keeping and men engaged in fire keeping activities. It was about how they were meant to work together. For the benefit of future generations, and the Earth and the entire continuum of life on the planet. Because men and women have had a bit of a history of not quite getting it together, and hence we have family court.
Mars and Venus.
Yeah, Mars and Venus. I mean, there's an entire industry built on the differences.
Exactly.
What I'm really interested in, and of course, then when the British Crown signed on in 1667, because the British and the Dutch have always been in a bit of a trade war that started off in Europe and they carried on over here. And what the British saw was that this treaty relationship with the Haudenosaunee, with the Indigenous people of the Americas, that they had the closest contact with, because they were sort of coming in from the east there up the St. Lawrence, it was a competitive advantage, and the British didn't really like that, and they wanted in on what they felt was a really good deal. And so, the Haudenosaunee said, hey, yeah, sure, here are the terms, you understand them. Oh, we have our way of certifying that this happened. There's ceremony involved. It's actually got all of the hallmarks of a wedding. If you're bringing two families together, two cultures together. Mm-hmm. It has everything, gift-giving, songs, prayers, dancing. There must be dancing.
Yes.
And so this is, we could go on about treaty relationships and treaty law. It's one of my favorite things. And it's a covenant. It's a covenant agreement. Now, the British, being the British and having a certain style and set of habits and ideas, they said, hey, this is a governance treaty. And, it can work that way too. The Turo Wampum sort of says, hey, you're in your colonial ship. We're in our Indigenous canoe. We're going to go down the river of life together with, friendship, respect, and mutual benefit. And we're going to share this place because there's enough to go around. But we're not going to interfere with each other. We're going to cooperate where it's appropriate. And desirable. It has to be mutually desirable. So it's not unilateral. It has to be completely consensual. And this is I said the C word, which is consent, which is one of the features that we see over and over again, especially now in our modern environment, that we have different ideas of what represents and constitutes consent. So the Canadian Constitution Act, Section 35, we talk a lot about that. It's otherwise known as the duty to consult and accommodate Indigenous peoples.
There's another C word, consult.
Consultation. and then we have the 2014 Williams decision, the Crown versus Williams, where we actually then put that sort of two-part epoxy, that second part, which is evidence of free, prior, informed consent before you get your permit. And so this is where so you put the Williams decision, is a 2014 Supreme Court decision, together with the 1982 Canadian Constitution Act, which was repatriated by, amongst others, former Chief Del Riley, who, it's a great story of how they conned the Canadian government at the time and the British government to actually bring the Constitution back to Canada, because before then nobody had any evidence that the Crown actually did agree that we're going to have to do this consultation, accommodation, consent, and we have this relationship with Indigenous peoples that predates Confederation by quite a bit, but nobody knew about it because it was all hanging out back in the UK and they weren't giving it up. So anyway, I got repatriated. Del Riley, I'm not going to steal his story. He tells it much better than I do. And his gang of merry men. And so what I work on is, Sam is very much involved in the grassroots community economic development, and I'm just an ordinary person with an extraordinary job. And my extraordinary job is working at the United Nations level. So we have a covenant that Canada actually signed and ratified, called the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And Article 15 is the otherwise known as the right to science. So, and this is the basis, kicking these kind of ideas around. I was like, how can we take Indigenous science, because it is a science that if I were to put it into a framework which most non-Indigenous people would understand, it would be like the stuff you see on Big Bang Theory. It's very quantum related. It's very string theory, entanglement. It's not monetary. It is not all about the money. It is about relationships and the fabric of the universe and how things work or don't.
And the fact is that our bodies are 80% water, and we're taught that in public school. And if we're not taught it in public school, we normally ask about it somewhere along in our little lives, going, water? What's that? What's water? When you first find out what's water, well, water is life. And that is the essence of why we're here today. And I have a big question. So Heather here is a medical geologist, and this is my big question. And I still can't fathom this myself, but why is bottled water better than your tap water?
It's not.
Thank you.
It's not. They claim it's regulated. I'd say please define regulation. In many cases, like water is, because Mniwachoni, and just for those who are sort of wondering about credentials, I am sort of I'm the United Nations go-to for mother, child, and reproductive health and environmental factors, including water chemistry. So, and I'm also the person that legal counsel for Standing Rock calls when they are wanting to obtain evidence that'll stand up in court, having to do with the legalities of, the things that are happening, like in Standing Rock and stuff like that. So I spend a lot of time in court. I spend a lot of time on United Nations Web TV because New York and Geneva are far, and I'm a single mother of 3 children.
Absolutely wonderful, loving children that I think the world of. I told you about them on a previous show, that they restored my faith in humanity, these kids. So I have so much respect for these little ones. I mean, they're not little, but I mean, they're 10 to 15.
Almost 16. Yeah, some of them are taller than I am now.
Yeah, but they are absolutely wonderful sons, and they've been taught a great deal about water, and I'm looking forward to having them on the show when we can get them.
Oh yeah, like these kids, can teach Justin Trudeau a thing or two about treaty law. So, and we're looking forward to, them having the opportunity to do that, because Lord knows they'll get more press time than I would trying to do it. We'll do that. But, and all 3 of my children have had very serious, mysterious health problems related to potentially related to water quality, that we're having a really, really hard time getting the powers that be to address, because we're suffering from a Walkerton type hangover where we think that we're still looking for the superbug. And there's lots of evidence that is now emerging that Walkerton had more to do with the very extreme degree of chemical mineralization in the Walkerton water supply.
Explain chemical mineralization.
So,
please.
Imagine, if you can, a drop of water and you divide it into 4 sections. It's when possible, I put everything into a medicine wheel teaching, because it's really straightforward and simple, and that's a good method that has worked for a very long time. So there are elements of the periodic table, as you mentioned, your metals and your minerals. Now those will, certain ones of them, particularly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, they will combine into rings and chains. And that is called organic chemistry. So these are your pharmaceuticals, your petrochemicals, your industrial solvents. And it's like the Lego of the universe. And like, if it can't be grown, it must be mined, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so those are things. So that's one thing that we can look for is metals and minerals. And so those are, the metals and minerals will be things like arsenic and fluoride and lead and things that we understand have health consequences in of themselves. Mm-hmm. But then these elements of the periodic table can form little groups, little families. And that's where we get our pharmaceuticals, and that's where we get our industrial solvents, and that's where we get our fertilizers and things like that, and our pesticides. And we are very creative as a species, and not only was there naturally occurring stuff, we made some of our own that nature did not make.
Hence synthetics.
And so we need to be testing for those as well. And there's hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of possibilities. And that's just including the stuff that we have made and released into the environment. When it gets into the environment, it starts to degrade. It starts to break down, if it can. And it'll recombine into brand new chemicals that nobody actually manufactured. It's a bit of a square dance in the water column. And you're going to get things I like to call Franken chemicals that no research has been done on. We really don't even know what's there. So we need to do the same kind of testing that the Olympic Drug Squad is doing right now when they're testing liquid samples of athletes' urine, looking for performance-enhancing chemicals. We should be and could be, don't understand why we're not, quite frankly, doing the same thing, testing people's tap water. To look for performance-destroying chemicals.
And I'm going to ask why, if we're doing these just for athletes that are, playing sports or whatever,
who drink a lot of water.
I guess they do drink a lot of water. But if we're testing them for enhancement of a sport, but we're talking about life as a whole. Why aren't we testing the same water from our tap as we are with Olympic athletes?
And this is sort of the question, the technology to do this, a gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, inductively coupled plasma, ion chromatographs, it's been available since the 1980s because the prospectors in the oil and gas and the mining industries, not to mention the Olympic Drug Squad, and fraud investigators for insurance companies looking for, especially arson, looking for accelerants. They've been using this technology for several decades, and this is basically publicly funded research that sort of taught them how to use it, and yet these tools are not available to communities to help protect the water supply and monitor them properly. Because we got sort of derailed by this whole focus on E. coli, and let us not forget that E. coli is just one of the many possible things that has a DNA sequence that could be dissolved in our water supply. We have molds in there, mold spores, we have pollens, we have all sorts of things that could trigger a biological reaction. And that's another class of things we should be looking for. And of course, the last class would be having to do with things that are radioactive, that have an energy field that can cause genetic mutations, ionizing radiation. Sam mentioned radon gas. I live in a community that, we don't have hard water, we have bullet water. So the good news is I used to work as a prospector for a mining company, and we actually look for water samples that look like this because there's economically significant minerals in there. So that's the good news. The bad news is you shouldn't be drinking it. It's really bad for your kidneys. It's bad for your skeletal system. It's bad for your brain. It's bad for your liver. But no, it's not E. coli, and it won't give you diarrhea. And that's where we got stuck in like the 2000s.
Yeah, you talk E. coli. Salmonella, I guess, was another one there. Salmonella, not so much, but E. coli got the big rap of stuff. But.
Well, especially now, we're okay. My heart and thoughts and all my love goes out to the people down in Chatham right now that are downriver from us in the Thames River Watershed, because we have two classes of problems that we really need to deal with simultaneously. One of them is water quality, and we've already talked a lot about that, but the other one is water quantity. We live in extreme times. So some places are going to get drought, not enough water, and some people are going to get floods. One of the things that really concerns me from a regulatory perspective is when you have pretty much unregulated gravel extraction from the floodplain. So, we're taking out gravel and sand deposits that are the river's absorptive capacity. That when you do have high water, it doesn't get all flooded all at once. You can just go sucking up into the gravel deposits, and they're sort of like a sponge, and they'll hold the water so that it can be metered out in a more regulated fashion. But since we've had pretty much unregulated development, and aggregate is used, for concrete structures and road building and these kinds of things, there's been such an emphasis on infrastructure. And even though we could recycle these things, we don't. They've just been, the Ministry of Natural Resources, I have a huge axe to grind with them because they have been issuing permits as long as somebody shows up with a, properly filled out form and the proper fee. They have been issuing permits from places that not only are under Indigenous governance control, but that are really important for the ecosystem of the river. Now, the other thing that I worry about, especially in southwestern Ontario, and we're very agricultural, and there's like absolutely no research on this, is the effect of the massive amount of tile drainage that has gone on that sort of short circuits if the water had fallen on the field, which this used to be a forested area. That's why we call it a forest city. But we cut down all the trees. We put in agriculture. So we have soil erosion problems, but instead of having a chance to even infiltrate into the ground and take the long, slower route to the river where it discharges, it hits a tile drain, which is only like what, a foot down, just below the root zone, because that's all they care about, just below the root zone. And then it's a huge, massive network, subterranean network, that hits a drain, which was meant to be a little creek, but now is, and you can see this everywhere, is hitting like massive amounts of water, especially when you have situations like we've had recently with massive snowmelt. And then the effects of all this paving, like we, the water, you can't really complain. And poor Chatham's in a sag. They call it the Chatham Sag. And and then the wind in this part of the world comes out of the west. So while the water is trying to flow from east to west, we got some serious winds pushing it back the other way. Yeah. And Chatham's in a low spot. So
it gets kaboomed.
At what point are the insurance companies going to say, oh, I'm sorry, the Ministry of Natural Resources should not have issued that permit to take gravel. This is not our fault. We're not covering that loss. Yes. So, and then who pays?
Yeah, it all comes back, and it's all connected. So we're extremely connected as the world keeps turning, and the water, of course, is our life. So if we start protecting it in just one spot alone, we're going to be able to spread, because the water spreads. And the sooner we can clean up even minute particles, minute things, like don't flush prescription drugs, don't put things in there that you can't put back to the earth. Don't put them in your water.
Yeah.
Don't flush them.
Well, I think the thing to do is, as I was listening live streaming, it sort of seems like a kind of weird eavesdropping, but you guys put it really succinctly, and I really appreciated it. It's like we're all connected by the water. I think it was Rachel Carson that mentioned that everyone's downstream of somebody.
Yeah, of somebody.
So one of the things that we're trying to do, because the government has sort of like thrown up their hands and said, we can't do this. I'm like, oh, thank you for admitting that. What we need the government to do is do what they're supposed to do. And that is only issue permits to these proponents. I mean, they're not bad people. They're just, they're going to try,
they're going to try and do the best.
They've got their business, and their business is whatever their business is. It's usually some sort of development. They are not hydrogeologists. They are not the traditional caretakers of the land and water. They don't know where the spawning grounds are. They don't know, where the sacred places are, the headwaters. So this is why we have a permitting process. And what's happening now is, I've studied this kind of in depth, is that while we say in principle that we need to First Nations should be, if we're playing baseball, they're first base. They're first in line for consultation, accommodation, free, prior, informed, written consent. So we need to create mechanisms and capacities within Indigenous communities to receive these, if people want to do something within a particular territory, first of all, they need to know whose territory they're in.
Yes.
A great way to organize this is by watershed. Municipal boundaries, provincial boundaries, water doesn't respect those.
No.
It's like, what the heck?
Water has a mind of its own.
Yeah, so I mean, in Canada, we had some really great scientists back in the day where they were properly supported and given the proper amount of scientific freedom to do their job. This is the public sector. They were public employees. They took an oath. They work for the Queen, which means that they are involved in this treaty relationship with us because they're upholding the honor of the Crown. So back in the day, and we've got some really good foundational science to work on, thank goodness, because now it's the Dark Ages, but and pretty much any government scientist will tell you that. They did some really good mapping work. We're really good at that. So we know where the watershed boundaries are. why don't we snap our administrative boundaries and our regulatory boundaries to something real like that? And then look at the people, the stakeholders who actually live in those places, and give them the decision-making authority, give them the decision-making power. And so the idea is that first you would go, it's like baseball, we're going to play baseball, like Moneyball. If you build it, they will come. Field of Dreams, there are many baseball movies that we can put on the viewing list for the Water School for decision makers. So First Nations are first in line. They are going to be the most vigilant because they have the longest history and they have the closest relationship with the land that is proven, demonstrated to be healthy. They understand sustainability in ways that if you have been educated in a Western Greek, Franco-Prussian mindset, you will not understand. You can't get there from here because everything that we talk about is about time, quality, and money. And
as soon as you add money, you're toast.
That's our framework, So you have to go back to a time before money mattered too much, and where we're talking about future generations. So the decision-making framework, and these are sort of general teachings. So
Money
I'm
matters.
not.
My little voice over here.
Yeah, he's
Money
listening now.
matters.
Sammy's come back to join us.
Yeah.
Just for the last couple minutes.
This is why Sam and I have very animated conversation. So from a scientific, ecological point of view, you cannot do better than the Indigenous decision-making framework, which is three-part instead of time, money, and quality. Their perspective was, is it good for the earth? Is it good for 7 generations from now? So our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren, are they going to look at this decision and say, yeah, that was a good one? Or are they going to say, what were they thinking? And is it good for a single-celled organism, like a single cell, all the way up to a multicellular, very complex, long-lived organism like a sycamore tree that has got a few hundred years on this planet, and everything in between?
Okay, so wrap it up there for us.
So this is what we would like to see is that we redirect. Like right now, if you're a developer, you basically show up at the Ministry of Natural Resources looking for your permit. You fill in the form properly, you give them the proper fee, and you're going to get your permit if everything's sort of lined up the way the ministry wants it. And then, they leave and by the way, you need to consult with the local. And they're like, what? Because they've already got their permit. This is like Willy Wonka's golden ticket to finance, insurance, and a professionally licensed or unionized workforce. If they didn't have that permit, they would get none of those things, and we wouldn't be having half the conversations that we're having, nor the conflict.
Now you're
Okay,
speaking my
Sammy?
language.
Yeah.
So with all this talk of permits and cash flow and how you get there, and it's really a very basic idea, and all it really talks about is how did we get this far? And we can all say how we got this far. We were all trying to live. We were all trying to make money. We're all trying to make our children live. We're all trying to make sure that everybody got healthy, grew well, got educated, and all those things in between happened. Now, we all wanted that as quick as we could possibly get it. But the system that we've put in place to regulate that is faulty. Now, through no fault of those people, through no fault of the Queen, no fault of the government, no fault. We're not blaming anybody. What we're going to say here is we need to start over, you guys. We need to start over from a fresh slate that looks at all of us in a pure light that says, okay, you're not a bad guy. I know you're not a bad guy, and here's your chance to prove you're an even better guy. And that's all we're really saying is there's an ability here within inside ourselves that we can do this, and we can learn it together. I wouldn't be here if not for friends who were showing me these things that said, you can do this. I know you can do this. If it wasn't for a good business friend, Laura Dana Onison, who came to me and said, you can do this, you can work this. I know you can work this. So what, you only got a grade 8 education. So what, all this other bad stuff happen to you along the way. I want you to be able to walk this walk properly and do it in steps like this. And if we have those people, if we have those things, and we hold them tandem and hand in hand, and we allow each other to grow, we allow each other to grow, that means we allow those steps to be hit without those big barriers or those big bank barriers that stop everything. If we allow that to happen, we win.
Thank you. That's very well said. And thank you, Sammy and Heather. And tune in next March 25th, which is Sunday, so that is exactly 1 month from now, and you will hear episode 2 of Smoke Signals Goes to Water School. Onagawahe, Bama P. Until later.